They said the earth had sealed it away for 2,000 years, but when the first spade cut into the soil, it bled. It wasn't blood in the human sense. It was darker, thicker, as if the ground itself had been keeping something alive, something that should never have been touched again. The archaeologists stood back in silence, each one pretending not to notice the smell that rose from the trench, a smell that didn't belong to rot, but to something still watching them. The pit was small, too small for a burial meant to honor the dead. Bones jutted from the packed clay like pale roots, and the first skull they uncovered was fractured, as if it had been cracked deliberately while the flesh was still warm. But the break wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was the bite mark. It didn't match any tool. It didn't match any animal. It matched teeth. Human teeth. They kept digging, their faces drained of color, because once you see something like that, you can't walk away without knowing how deep it goes. You want to know too. You're already wondering who it was. You're already imagining the sound. By the second day, they had pulled up 23 sets of remains, each in a fetal position, each skull split, each missing the lower jaw entirely, and among them, tiny bones, children, no older than 12. One was so small the bones seemed almost translucent. The lead archaeologist, a woman named Dr. Irena, tried to convince the team it was ritualistic trepanation, an ancient medical practice. But no one asked the obvious question aloud. Why would a medical act be done to so many children at once? And why did every adult's teeth show deep grooves, worn flat at the front, as if they had been grinding something soft but resistant? On the third night, when the rain turned the dig into black sludge, they unearthed the stone ring. It wasn't a natural formation. It was a perfect circle, only a few feet across, its inner surface engraved with lines so thin they seemed to pulse under the flashlight beam. Irena refused to translate them, at least not at first. She said the language was older than anything she had studied, but she also said the words looked like instructions. You've probably heard the lie that ancient rituals were about worship, or sacrifice, or appeasing the gods. This wasn't any of those. This was about hunger. By the end of that week, one of the students, a boy named Marek, refused to go near the trench. He kept saying he had dreamed of standing inside the circle, of feeling hands on his back pushing him forward. And in the dream, there was always chewing. Not frantic chewing, but slow, deliberate, and it didn't stop until he woke. The bones went to the lab. They shouldn't have. If you've read the later reports, you know they were never catalogued, never photographed again. The official record ends the moment the crates were sealed. But the unofficial notes, the ones copied quietly before they vanished, say the femurs of the children had been split cleanly down the middle, marrow scraped out with tools carved from human ribs. Irena disappeared the following spring. They say she drowned in the river near her home, but the body was never recovered, and her apartment was found locked from the inside, the bathtub full of black water, the same smell as the pit. What they never told the public was what she translated before she vanished. For words, over and over, spiraling inward on the stone. Share the flesh. Share the youth. Imagine hearing that in the voice of someone you trust. You see, this was not a burial ground in the traditional sense. It was a preparation site. The dead here were not mourned, they were harvested. The young were chosen first, their bodies consumed in a way that archaeologists struggle to describe without losing their careers. The flesh was not burned. It was not preserved. It was passed from mouth to mouth. But the true horror wasn't that they ate them. It was that the eating was done while they were still breathing. One skeleton, the smallest, showed deep gouges along the forearms and calves, defensive wounds. The cuts were made with stone knives, but the chewing marks were shallow, tentative, as if whoever was eating had been forcing themselves to stop, to keep the victim alive longer. Why? No one could answer. And maybe that's the point. A later expedition found similar sites across the valley, each with the same ring of engraved stone, each with bodies in the same fetal positions. But one site was different. The bones there were fresh. That's when the military sealed the area. Years later, a private collector purchased artifacts resembling those from the dig. One of the items was a jawbone, human, with the teeth sharpened to points. The collector claimed that when he left it in a sealed glass case overnight, Condensation formed on the inside, as if something had been breathing on the glass from within. Do you believe that? You should. Because here's the part one can't stop thinking about. The words on the stone ring were arranged so that the last word aligned perfectly with the first, forming an endless loop. No beginning, no end. As if the ritual was not an event, but a cycle. And if it was cycle, then maybe it never truly ended. In one of her last recorded lectures, Irena spoke about biological inheritance in ancient communities. The idea that certain behaviors could be embedded so deeply they became instinct. She smiled when she said it, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had eaten something she couldn't digest. Now here's something you won't find in any archive. A short recording, supposedly taken at the site before it was closed. You can hear wind, rain, the usual. And then you hear a voice, high, strained, whispering in a language no one has identified. There's a pause. Then you hear chewing. Wet. Slow. Some people say the recording is fake. Some say it's just wind. But if you listen closely, right after the chewing stops, you hear another sound. Breathing. From the person holding the recorder. And it's not theirs. If you think about it too long, you start to wonder whether the ritual was really about consuming flesh, or about passing something else on. Irena once wrote in her notes that the circle was not a place of death, but of continuity. That word haunts me. Continuity means it moves forward. It survives. It finds new hosts. And the more you read her handwriting, the more erratic it becomes, until the last page, which contains only one sentence, written in shaking strokes. They wanted us to remember the taste. Why do you think she would write that unless she had tasted it herself? The most disturbing part is that the bones found inside the ring showed no signs of decomposition beyond what would be expected for their age. No, the disturbing part is that the marrow and some of them still tested positive for hemoglobin, which should not be possible after 2,000 years. Unless it wasn't 2,000 years. Unless it was much sooner. If that's true, then someone has been keeping the ritual alive. Someone has been ensuring that the youth are still shared, still consumed. You think you'd notice if it was happening around you. But tell me, when was the last time you saw a missing persons case go truly public in your town? When was the last time you wondered why the search ended so quickly? The military never released the locations of the other sites, but satellite images showed disturbances in the earth, circles, deep in forests, far from any road. And one of them is less than 5 miles from a school. The children in that school learn about history. They learn about civilizations lost to time. But they don't learn this. And yet, sometimes, when they're on the playground, they'll say there's a woman who comes to the fence. She wears an old coat, and she doesn't smile. And she hums something low and broken. The children say she smells like wet soil. One boy said she asked him to open his mouth. He ran. I want you to imagine the feeling of teeth against your skin. Not biting, not breaking, just pressing, measuring. They say every ritual needs witnesses. Maybe that's what you are now. Because Irena's translation had a second half. It wasn't on the stone itself. It was hidden inside the circle, carved into the base where only someone standing in the exact center could see it. The words there were fewer. They said, once you see, you share. That's the part one can't stop thinking about. And if the cycle is still going, if someone is still standing in those circles right now, then maybe this isn't just a story. Maybe it's an invitation. You saw that too, didn't you?